Now we've got the host of the Mehdi Hasan Show on Peacock and MSNBC and the author of the new book, Win Every Argument, The Art of Debating, Persuading, and Public Speaking, Mehdi Hasan. Mehdi, thanks for coming back on.
Thanks for having me, Brian.
So I want to start with this because I think this is your element here. We found out recently that Fox was knowingly spewing bullshit about the 2020 election thanks to discovery in the Dominion trial. What's your message, not just to Fox, but Fox viewers in light of this?
You're being lied to. That's what the evidence tells us. You are being lied to by Fox hosts who say one thing in private and one thing in public, one thing to each other on text and another thing on air when the cameras are rolling. And Brian, you and I, we are condemned as members of the fake news press, of the liberal media. We're often seen by the right as people who look down on conservative voters. We disrespect people in the red states. We don't value them. And I just think to myself, no one has more disrespect, no one has more contempt for Republican voters than Republican cable hosts. And that's what's become clear from these revelations, that they had no problem lying to their viewers, pushing this big lie, because that's what they thought their viewers wanted to hear. So they indulged them with this conspiracy nonsense. There are texts between Tucker and his producer where Tucker Carlson is saying, I don't really want to do this, but that's what the producer's like, but this is what they want to hear. So they tell them what they want to hear. And in private, they say stuff like Sidney Powell, the crazy ex-Trump lawyer, who the viewers on Fox and Newsmax wanted to hear at the time. In private, Ingram, Tucker, Hannity are all saying she's crazy.
And we know, by the way, that even those Fox hosts knew that their audience believed them because they said it in text as well. And so every single, piece of this points to the fact that these people were knowingly lied to. And yet the irony of all of this is that those viewers still won't know, because the same people who they trust to deliver them this actual fake news aren't going to deliver them the actual news of the fact that, they were lied to during this election. So that's the irony of all this. The gatekeepers are the people who are lying themselves. And so that information will never get back to the people who need to know it most.
It's so true. And it's something that really bothers me, has bothered me since at least 2015, 2016, that a lot of Americans are in this bubble and there's no way to get through to them and say, you're being lied to, you're being conned. These are a bunch of, on the right now, the modern conservative movement is mainly conspiracy theorists and grifters who are making money off of you. And we saw that with, Trump voters who send, there was that story about them ticking the box or not ticking the box and their donations being taken from their bank accounts, and all sorts of stories about how they've been exploited by both Republican leadership and Fox hosts who are just interested in ratings. We know that they were worried about Newsmax taking viewers from them in the immediate wake of the November 2020 election. And so they doubled down on the big lie, which they knew not to be true. They continue. Tucker Carlson continues to push the big lie, even though we've seen what he said in private. And they don't have the guts to talk about it on air, at least when the texts to Mark Meadows were leaked from Fox hosts. Remember those texts to Mark Meadows? Which I think CNN obtained on January the 6th, where they're saying, call off the mob, tell your father to stop, tell your boss to stop. They're texting they're texting the kids, they're texting the chief of staff, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, at least those texts they kind of tried to address on air that night and in subsequent nights. These texts, it's silence.
Out in the ether, yeah. Well, I don't know. I'm still holding on hope that my Trump NFTs are going to appreciate double, triple in value. So we'll see what happens on that front.
You haven't been conned, Brian.
Yeah, I feel good about it. Mehdi, you were featured in an op-ed in The Guardian where you said that Biden's the most impressive president in my lifetime. First, I want to ask why. But second, there is this inclination among progressives, and I would argue that, it's fair to say you're arguably the most progressive host on cable. There's this inclination to traditionally attack the Democrats for not being progressive enough, basically always to tack left because, to coddle the party is basically a concession to the establishment and it undermines your progressive bona fides. Is that something that you've wrestled at all with?
It's a problem in our polarized era where people want politics in the form of a football game. So there is this kind of team sport. I think we saw it recently with the East Palestine situation with Pete Buttigieg. So, for example, I think there's a lot of criticisms of the Biden administration and of Buttigieg, both on regulation going back to the Obama era and on their handling of it as a PR issue, the messaging around it. And I think that's a problem. On the other hand, because Fox ridiculously bash Buttigieg, give Trump a pass, involve homophobia, a lot of liberals immediately want to defend Buttigieg. So immediately an issue like East Palestine becomes partisan. It's you defend Pete Buttigieg in the honor of the Biden administration, Or are you defending Trump, who went to the town? And my problem is, no, there's enough blame to go around. Of course, Trump did a lot of awful things. Of course, Elaine Chao never turned up to, train derailments. But we should also be able to say, is the Biden administration doing enough on this stuff? Is the transportation secretary doing the right thing? Was it right for no senior official to turn up? I mean, the EPA chief went, but who the hell knows who the EPA chief went? Where was the president, vice president, transportation secretary? They did leave an open goal for Trump to turn up and pretend to care about these kind of quote unquote left behind people. So I think examples like that are common nowadays, where immediately a news story becomes partisan lines. Now, I'm not going to do a both sides here. The right is a cult. The right treats Donald Trump as a cult leader. I don't think liberals at that point around Biden, Harris, or anyone else.
No boat parades for Joe Biden.
There's been no boat parades for Joe Biden or gold statues. Remember the gold statue, literally like Moses style. Yeah. There was a gold statue taken around one of the CPAC, one of the conferences. Yeah. But there is a huge amount of partisanship. Let's not deny that. And those of us who are on TV, on opinion channels, opinion shows, we're expected to often by some viewers just only attack one side. And I don't do that. I hold power to account. Obviously, I see the Republican Party and the right as the biggest threat to American democracy, to our climate, to our environment. I get that. But the Biden administration's in power. We should be able to critique them, as I do, on issues like asylum, on issues like the closeness to big business, etc. Now, having said that, let's go back to your earlier question. Joe Biden, I did say, is the most impressive president of my lifetime. I got attacked by people on the right and left. Interestingly, people on the right saying, "Oh, you're a clown," because they hate Biden. They think he's the worst. They think every Democratic president's the worst ever. And people on the left who think, "Oh, you just sold out when you joined corporate media because Biden's not lefty enough." Of course, he's not lefty enough. He's nowhere near lefty enough for me. The point of that comment is to say he's way more left than I thought he would be. And he's way more left than any previous Democratic president I can think of, going back to LBJ and maybe even FDR. Now, to say he's the most impressive president of my lifetime is damning with faint praise. It's a low bar. The presidents of my lifetime are people like Ronald Reagan, Bush Sr., Bush Jr., Bill Clinton, Donald J. Trump. Barack Obama is the one people probably would say, most people might say, is their favorite Democratic president. And I'm saying no. I look at Biden and I think he's done more in his first term than Barack Obama did over 2 terms. Not just in policy terms, but let's talk about deep. People say he's not done anything. No, sorry. American Rescue Plan, bipartisan infrastructure package, the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act. These are huge pieces of legislation. Most presidents would be happy with 1 or 2 of them. He got 4 or 5 of them through, despite having these Republican obstructionists and Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema. Those are huge achievements. Let's not beat around the bush. So I would say that, but also it's not just legislatively, Brian. Even the small things, or what people would call small things, I think are big things. Biden was asked to go on Fox News with Brett Baier, and I say Fox News, quote unquote. I prefer to call it Fox. It's not news, as we just discussed. He didn't do it. Every president does that Super Bowl interview. I think Barack Obama did it with Bill O'Reilly, if memory serves me correctly. I don't think any previous Democratic president would stand up to Fox in that way. Even that, I think, is, wow, that impresses me. Now, is there a lot more Joe Biden should be doing, especially on issues like immigration, especially on issues like Israel-Palestine, especially on issues like COVID, right? I think he started well and then went downhill. Yes. But is he the most impressive president of my lifetime? Yes.
I agree with you. I also think that I'm of the mind that we are much, much better served by cheering on our successes as opposed to complaining about everything we don't get, because we know that the right is just going to attack Joe Biden and attack Democrats. And so if he's getting attacked by the right and the left, then it's only negative coverage of him. And then we turn around and wonder why Republicans win and Democrats lose.
I agree with you halfway. I would say the importance of still attacking him or criticizing him or holding him to account, as I do on my show, on social media, etc., is here's the advantage that some people on the left didn't realize, and actually members of the squad, Bernie Sanders, others did realize, which is that Joe Biden, one of the good things, and I mean Biden as in the administration, not just him as a person, especially when he had Ron Klain as his chief of staff. Let's see how the new guy does. But he's actually receptive to pressure. That's another good thing about him, in a way that Barack Obama, again, wasn't. People have to go back and remember, Barack Obama had people like Rahm Emanuel going out and lashing out at the left publicly, calling them crazy and needed to be drug tested. All those other phrases. He had people in his comms team saying all sorts of awful things publicly on record about the left. Joe Biden has literally tried to work with the left. The Congressional Progressive Caucus will tell you they had a receptive ear, and Ron Klain and others in this administration. You can see Biden makes U-turns, good U-turns, when he gets something wrong and people pressure him. You'd see that. And I'm hoping he'll change on this transit ban for asylum seekers, which we critique the Trump administration for doing, but the Biden administration is now doing a version of it too. So I think pressure needs to be applied, because actually that's another good thing about having grown-ups, actual grown-ups in the White House and not crazies, which is they actually respond to pressure, lobbying, activism.
Well, then that begs the question, right now as to whether President Biden should run for a second term. There's kind of this cognitive dissonance where people are happy with the accomplishments that his administration has gotten, but at the same time think that he's too old to serve again. And so, yeah, there's this cognitive dissonance here. Where do you stand on this?
It's a great question. What I worry about most is that wherever you stand, we should be able to have a debate about it. This goes back to your point about, partisanship, and my point about politics as team sport. There seems to be on the Democratic side, weirdly, Dems in disarray is now Dems in array, and it's Republicans in disarray, in civil war. You've got Donald Trump already running, Nikki Haley running, Tim Scott's about to announce, Ron DeSantis, we know, is probably going to run as well. Who knows what the rest will do? Mike Pence, Ted Cruz, etc. And it's getting pretty vicious already between Trump and DeSantis. On the Democratic side, there's no talk of it all. Marianne Williamson, great. But there's no actual talk of anyone actually primarying. And Bernie Sanders has openly said he won't. Elizabeth Warren, probably not. Those are the big left-wing standard bearers from 2020. And I wonder, is it right to have no debate at all? Regardless of whether you can be pro-Joe, anti-Joe, you can be worried about his age, not worried about his age. You can think he's not left-wing enough, too left-wing. But let's have a debate. Let's not just coronate people. I think in 2008, that didn't work out so well with the Hillary Clinton coronation, when Biden actually, when Hillary ran against Barack Obama and loses. And then in 2016, it's seen as hers by right, and Joe Biden doesn't run. And it doesn't work out so well. I think it's good to have debate. Sorry to plug the book, which is out this week. It's literally cool. It's literally about debate. Win every argument, the art of debating, persuading, and public speaking. I say in the book, I agree with the French essayist from the 19th century, Joseph Joubert, who says it is better to debate an issue without settling it than to settle it without debating it. And I think, fine, let Joe Biden be the candidate, but debate it. Let's talk about the age factor. Is it going to hurt him electorally? Is it wise politically to have someone in their mid-80s as president of the United States, given all the health issues surrounding that? All of those who would be the heir apparent, if God forbid he passes in office, is Kamala Harris still the right VP, the right successor? We know Pete Buttigieg wants the job at some point, but are there better people? What about all the great Democratic governors who just got elected in November? We talk about the Democratic Party not having a deep bench. I don't agree with that. Even if I don't share all their politics, they're impressive politicians winning important states. Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania, Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan, Wes Moore in Maryland. I mean, let's have a discussion about the future of the Democratic Party. I also have an issue with the fact that the Democratic Party until very recently was a complete gerontocracy. Thankfully, Pelosi, Hoyer, Clyburn stood aside. But, I think there is a real issue in this country where you can't run for president until you're 35. There's an age limit on one end, but not the other.
Mehdi, I want to switch over to talking about the book now. I really love the booby trap chapter of the book. So first, can you explain what that is? And also, you describe a few booby traps. Can you say what the best one that you've laid in an interview was?
So I talk in the book about the fundamentals of debate and argument. That's the first third of the book, is about stuff that people might be familiar with, how you appeal to people's emotions, how you use logic, how you go after, you bolster your own credibility while reducing your opponents, what Aristotle called pathos, logos, and ethos, how you best use those. And I give examples in the book. I talk about the importance of listening. But then I get to the middle portion of the book and I try and reveal for the first time. And my daughter said to me, my 10-year-old said, "Why are you giving this away? Now you'll be able to use it against you." And I do give away some of my tricks, some of the tricks of the trade, some of the techniques, some of the useful tactics you can use in an interview, in a debate, in an argument to get the upper hand, from the rule of three to the art of the zinger, the mic drop, to booby traps, as you mentioned. And what I call booby traps, and I talk in the book, it gives me an excuse to talk about the Rambo movies, which are some of my favorite movies growing up. And I talk about how, random trivia point for the movie buffs, John J. Rambo, who's seen as this great violent killer, actually kills no one in Rambo First Blood. Not a single person. Those are in the later movies where he guns down entire Russian and Vietnamese armies. In the first movie, he uses a bunch of booby traps. He's hiding in the forest. He's being chased by a vindictive sheriff. And he uses fantastic booby traps that he learned in Vietnam to kind of take people out. And I talk about the way that you can do the same thing through rhetoric, through argument in interviews. How do you lay a booby? The whole point of a booby trap is you set a trap and the other person sets it off, not you. You invite them in and they're caught off guard and unbalanced. And the way I say in the interview, the way I say in the book is that I've done it in my interviews is you try and catch people off guard. You catch them off guard with their own words, with their own contradictions, with questions that they aren't expecting, booby traps that lead them to a place they weren't expecting to go. And some people call this a gotcha. And I hate that phrase gotcha because number one, there's nothing wrong with getting people. If you're holding people to account, politicians say that's a gotcha question. I've had that told to me by left-wing and right-wing politicians. And I find that ridiculous. Like, it's my job to try and get you in the sense of get you on the record, get you to admit something, get you to be held to account. But also this idea that it's some kind of unfair trick. Well, no, it's not, because we know what's going on here. This is, this is a clash. This is a confrontation, especially if it's a formal debate. You know what people are getting into. And one of my favorite ones is I love to use people's quotes against them. It's one of my favorite tactics because people have said a lot of things, especially in a social media age. There's a lot of material out there. And one of the fun things I've done in the past, and again, some people get annoyed by it, but I think it's legitimate. I talk about it in the book, is I like to read someone a quote of theirs, but not tell them it's their quote, and see if they agree or disagree with it. And again, people can say, oh, that's unfair. It's not unfair. It's their words. It's not my job to remember their words.
Yeah.
And number two, you're trying to trick them. But no, actually, there's a substantive point to this, which is, are you consistent in your views? And do you recognize that some of your views are bonkers when I take your name off of them? And a classic example of that was General Michael Flynn, who was a national security advisor to Donald Trump. Prior to him joining the administration, he came on my show on Al Jazeera English. He was then a kind of Trump proxy for the media. And one of the things I interviewed him about was his hawkishness on Iran. He's one of this bomb Iran, bomb Islamist brigade. And my team and I did the digging. And some of the things I say in the book is you got to do your homework. You got to do your research before you do any interview, any kind of public appearance. And we found a quote when he was director of the Defense Intelligence Agency under Barack Obama. He spoke in front of Congress and said, Iran does not pose a nuclear threat, or some, I don't remember the exact words, but some form of Iran's not a big nuclear threat. And I read that out to him and said, you keep saying we've got to do something about Iran's nuclear. What about this claim that Iran's not a nuclear threat? And he goes, I don't agree with that. I said, you don't agree with those words? No, I don't agree. Well, those are your words. That's one of my favorite moments, because there's nowhere for the person to go. They can't slag off the words. They can't say, yeah, it's a great. Again, some people think that's unfair. I think it's a totally legitimate interview technique and tactic, because again, you're not making up words. What's worse is when you put words in someone's mouth. I'm quoting their words to them. It's their job to know it's their words.
Another excellent chapter was Beware of the Gish Galloper. You included the Urban Dictionary definition in the book, which I thought was awesome. And that dictionary is spewing so much bullshit in such a short span of time that your opponent can't address, let alone counter all of it. That is so pertinent today.
Who could I be thinking of there? Who could I be referring to?
Yeah, the jury's out on that one. That resonated with me because the whole foundation of my YouTube channel was taking these clips by Republicans, just of them just spewing bullshit and not getting any pushback, and basically, dissecting them piece by piece. That is why I started my YouTube channel. There's this void in pushback against right-wing disinformation. I have the luxury of doing it on my own time and not, contending with any pushback. So I get to lay my points out and kind of have the last word here. So much of Donald Trump's success is that he can pepper you with an absolute avalanche of bullshit, and it's impossible to push back. And even if you do rebut a few things, he'll beat you back down with another fire hose of bullshit. So what do you do in that scenario? How do you take on an adversary with no scruples and no shame like Donald Trump?
Yes, and it's sadly no longer just Donald Trump. I start, I
Jim Jordan and
Marjorie Taylor Greene. I mean, it's become a Republican tick now because they've seen it worked. I mean, why wouldn't it? They saw it work for Donald Trump in 2016 and to a lesser extent in 2020. This idea that you just steamroll your opponent with absolute nonsense, with so many lies, so many conspiracies, so many untruths, so many factual inaccuracies that your opponent does not know where to begin and physically cannot in the time allotted rebut them all. And the audience, a neutral audience, is left thinking, well, maybe that person has a point. They said so many things that sounded factual, and the other person didn't rebut them. And that's what the Gish Galloper relies on. It comes from an evolutionist called Duane Gish, a creationist called Duane Gish, who used to debate against evolutionists and do the same thing, just pile on bunches of out of context scientific studies, out of context quotes and stats to try and make it look like evolution is false and creation is true. So it's called the Gish Gallop. And I say in the book, there is a way to stop it. It's not easy, but there are methods you can use. And I say it's a 3-step process that I outline is number one, pick your battle. You cannot. Don't try. And if Donald Trump or a Trumpian figure throws 100 lies at you, you're not going to be able to stop 100 lies. Don't even try 99. Just go one. Pick the most absurd, ridiculous one that maybe represents all the others and take that one apart and point out to the audience that the rest are as nonsense as this one. And I give an example in the book of where I did that in an Oxford Union debate on Islam, where my opponent was trying to say Islam is a religion of violence and listed basically every terrorist attack, every example of Muslims doing bad things that they could come up with, dozens and dozens in the space of like a minute and a half. There's no way I could have responded to kind of every issue: misogyny, terrorism, patriarchy. It was a long list of things that Muslims are accused of. So I just went for one. I said, hey, you said Islam was born in Saudi Arabia. Islam was born 1,300 years before Saudi Arabia existed. So your math is off, and got a laugh from the crowd. And that's what you got to do. You got to kind of pick the most absurd, pick your battle. Number two, call it out. You need to tell people what is going on. You say, look, this is what they're doing. They're trying to confuse you. They're trying to flood the zone with shit, to quote the great Steve Bannon, former advisor to Donald Trump. They openly say it. That's our aim, to flood the zone with bullshit. And then the third way is to not budge. This is something I've said for years, Brian. I think you and I have talked about it before on your show. The importance to a good interview in particular is to have the follow-up questions. Don't just ask one question. They give you a ton of BS and then you move on to the next topic. No, you say, hold on, you didn't answer my question. You buried your answer in the midst of all this other crap. And I think that's so important, is to not budge. Your opponent, your adversary, your interviewee, the other side wants to move on to something else. Don't let them. Stay put. Don't budge. And it's something I do in my interviews. I give the example in the book of Jonathan Swan, then of Axios, now of the New York Times. He did this great interview with Donald Trump on COVID. And it was one of the first times we saw Trump, really squirming, not knowing where to go, because all his tried and tested gish galloping, Jonathan just said, well, hold on. Let's talk about what you just said. Let's talk about that statistic on COVID deaths. And Trump didn't know what to do, because normally the interview would have moved on by then.
I do want to read an excerpt from the book on exactly that point. You wrote, referring to Steve Bannon's quote about flooding the zone with shit, the writer and author Jonathan Rauch once remarked, "This is not about persuasion, this is about disorientation." He's right. When the likes of Trump and Gish engage in the gallop, their purpose is often not to try to win over, but muddy the argument for everyone involved. They can bewilder and confuse while hopping from one falsehood to the next. And I think that was, that obviously stuck out at me to the point where I want to.
And it also has implications for beyond rhetoric, debate, argument. It also has implications for democracy, Brian.
Right. I mean, the whole point is that it destabilizes everything, because then you don't know what's true. And so
that's exactly what fascism thrives on. If you read the works of people like Jason Stanley, they make this point. The point of the fascist, the authoritarian, why they lie, why they discredit the media, why they don't want to live in a reality-based universe, why they want alternative facts, is not because they want you to believe them over the liberal or the progressive. They want you to believe no one. They want you to leave you confused, disoriented. And what happens then? Then you are more susceptible to the strong man who wants to lead you into the light.
Perfectly put. Mehdi, you're a pretty dangerous person to debate. How has that impacted getting interviews for you? Because we live in a completely bifurcated media ecosystem. Yeah. And so Republicans don't have to go on left of center outlets, because there are plenty of outlets on the right for them to go to. I know for me personally, I can't get anyone to the right of Adam Kinzinger and Mike Murphy. So that should give you an idea of how conservative the guests that I have on. And I hardly have the reputation that you have. So how has that been for you?
So it's a great question. It's the question I get asked most. And I remember the time I got asked it literally every minute of every day in the days after Eric Prince, when Eric Prince, my interview with the former Blackwater CEO, went viral at the time. So many people just kept saying to me, why did he come on your show? Why did he agree to an interview with that? I was like, I don't know. I wouldn't agree to an interview with me. But Eric Prince did. I often say there's a mix of reasons. I think different people have different attractions. Some people, it's ego. They just like the idea of a row. They think that no one can touch me. Some interviewer called Mehdi. I said, I can beat them up. There's a lot of overconfidence and ego amongst some of these public figures. I think some of them just enjoy it, to be fair, especially on the right. Credit where credit's due. A lot of conservatives like to have a row in a way that some liberals run away from a debate, don't like to have their beliefs challenged. Actually, conservatives, maybe because they were in the minority on their student campus or whatever it was, they're used to kind of the rough and tumble of having to defend their positions, and they enjoy it. And then some people are just ignorant. I don't do it in an abusive way, just literally ignorant, don't know who I am. And that helped me a lot when I was at Al Jazeera English, and a lot of people in the American political scene didn't know me. I got a lot of Republicans on when I was at Al Jazeera English. I mentioned Michael Flynn, Steve Rogers. We had a bunch of Trump people came on the show then, partly because of Al Jazeera English seen as a global channel, and I wasn't a known quantity perhaps in that way. Now at MSNBC, it's much harder. I'm much better known, and I'm coming at them with an MSNBC request. We have had a few Republicans on the show, which have created some tense moments, viral moments. I talk about them in the book. John Bolton and I went really at it over Iraq and Iran and other issues. Republican Congressman Dan Crenshaw and I had an argument about immigration on Twitter. And again, fair play to him. He agreed to come on the show and continue it on TV. And that was another big moment. But you're right. It's much harder to get Republicans on the show because why would they come on and do a tough interview where they can go and talk to Sean Hannity? And also, I mean, to be fair, I don't invite that many Republicans on the show, and I'm open about why, because I have a hygiene test on the show, which is I don't want election deniers on the show. And unfortunately, the vast majority of elected Republicans and prominent conservative media personalities now are election deniers, are conspiracy theorists. And I don't believe there's any value. I love having an argument, but I'm not going to have an argument with people who say up is down, black is white, hot is cold. I don't believe there's a value in platforming that. Now, I've talked to my team about this. Whether I hold on to that test all the way till November 2024, I don't know, because at some point the reality is we live in a two-party system, and if you say, well, I won't have election deniers on, and one whole party is full of election deniers, then you're basically saying you're not going to have one whole party on. Now, how comfortable am I with that as a journalist? I don't know. I'm trying to stick to it. I've been sticking to it for 2 years. Let's see how long I can stick to it.
And if you can ask one question to Donald Trump and Joe Biden separately, what would they be?
Oh my word. That's a great question.
Well, I'm glad that I asked a good question after having asked the question that everybody on the face of the earth has asked you previously. So there's a little bit of redemption here for me.
No, but the question everyone asked, it's a question that I asked. I mean, it's a good question. That wasn't just because everyone asked it doesn't mean it's not a good question. It is a good question. I don't know why Eric Prince came on the show. What I would say is don't jinx it, because I still need people to come on my show. So let's not jinx it too much.
Well, worst case scenario, I could introduce you to Mike Murphy and you'll get the.
Let's talk about Joe Biden. Joe Biden's a great question. Joe Biden. I mean, look, you know what I'd say? I don't think this is the best question, but it's a question I feel strongly about right now, and it's relevant to our current moment. And no one's really talking to about it, which is COVID. I think the administration really dropped the ball on COVID. I know people want to move on from the pandemic. I'm not one of the people who refuses to, and pandemic hasn't moved on. Hundreds of people still dying every day. I would say to Joe Biden that when you ran for office, you said a president who'd been in office while hundreds of thousands of people died from COVID is not fit to be president. How do you square that remark with your own presidency, in which more people have died from COVID than died on Donald Trump's watch? Far too many people have died during this presidency. I'm not saying they're all the fault of Joe Biden. Many are the fault of Fox hosts and Republican governors pushing anti-vaxxer nonsense. But a lot of it is to do with the fact that this administration just wanted to wrap up the pandemic and move on in order to win the midterms and get reelected in 24, even though the pandemic is very much not over. And a lot of vulnerable people who are vaccinated are still dying. So I want to press Joe Biden on COVID. I think he gets a bit of a pass on that because everyone left and right now just wants to move on. For Donald J. Trump, people say to me, what would you do if you had an interview with Donald Trump? And I always say, it would last 60 seconds because he'd get up and walk out. He has a history. People forget this. Before he was elected to office, he walked out in a BBC interview called John Sweeney. He pushed John Dickerson, basically physically almost pushed him out of he got a guy to push him out of the Oval Office when he didn't like the questions. What would you ask Donald? This is the problem, Brian. It's flooding the zone with shit. I don't know where to start. There's 100 different topics.
Well, you see, Mehdi, having read the book, I know that you should just stick to one.
Just stick to one. Yeah. Just stick to one. Okay. So what is the one that I would want to go on? Oh, I know what I'd do, Brian. I would do rapid fire, just fact questions. I think Donald Trump gets away with the fact that no one has asked it. What does NATO stand for? Just basic stuff. I would just literally ask him, who is the president of France? What does NATO stand for? What's America's oldest? Just basically, because we laugh, but the man knows nothing. Yeah. And he managed to BS his way through 4 years in office without anyone really ever just asking him just simple questions.
One of my favorite interview moments from Donald Trump is he was with some Christian conservative outlet, and they asked him what his favorite Bible verse was.
No, it wasn't. I remember that. It wasn't. It was, what's their names? It was the guy who lost his job, Mark. It was the duo.
Yes.
Halperin. It was Halperin asked him, what's your favorite Bible? He goes, what did he say? He said all of them.
He said, it's very personal to me. I don't like to share that kind of stuff. And they just kept pressing him. And he kept saying, I don't really want to talk about that. That's very personal to me, as if they're asking for
literally never read the Bible. Actually, I used to always joke with friends that I would pay money to the White House press corps during the Trump era if one of them just stood up, if a White House correspondent stood up and just said, Mr. President, when will you be heading for Wakanda? The people there love you. When will you head for Wakanda in Africa? And they're waiting for you, Mr. President.
2 weeks.
And he would have said, they're great people. They love me. They're great people. I'm heading there soon. I look forward to seeing. I would have paid money. If you lost your job for that as a wife, it would be worth it to go out on that way.
Mehdi, where can we get the book?
The book is available all good bookstores. It's available from independent bookstores. It's available from Amazon. It's been out since Tuesday, the 28th of Feb. It's called Win Every Argument, the Art of Debating, Persuading, Public Speaking. It's available on Audible. I read the audiobook, and Brian, just for fun, we talked about Bolton, Crenshaw. What the fun we had with the audiobook is we put the actual clips. When I talk about all the interviews, you can hear the actual debates and clips in the audiobook. So that's a bit of fun for those of you who like to listen to your books, or you can read them, or you can buy the ebook and read it online.
It was fantastic. It's a very quick read. Really great job. Mehdi, thank you so much for taking the time. And again, for anybody watching and listening, the book is Win Every Argument, the Art of Debating, Persuading, and Public Speaking. Mehdi, thanks so much for taking the time.
Always a pleasure, Brian. Cheers.